PLC.
KCAA is your CNBC news affiliate. We're the station that gets down to business.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Justice Watch with Attorney Zulu Ali. I am Attorney Zulu Ali with the Justice Watch crew, Rosa Nunez, Michael Bilal Clark, and Dr. Akil Bashir. This week, like we do every week, we'll be discussing critical and important legal issues affecting our communities. This week, we'll be talking about juvenile justice and youth mentoring. And joining us will be Mr. Michael Carney. Mr. Carney grew up in Southeast San Diego. He has a bachelor's degree in psychology and political science from UC San Diego. He also has a Juris Doctorate from UC Hastings. He has been with the Riverside County District Attorney's Office for the past 12 years. He also is a team leader with the Gang Crimes Unit. He's received awards for felony prosecutor as well as public safety. He also recently received the Community Service Award from the RT Fields Bar Association earlier this year, and he also serves as a youth mentor. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Carney.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, man,
Thank
I appreciate
you for having me.
Oh yeah, appreciate you joining. I mean, one of the other things I want to speak about with Mr. Carney is that he's a colleague and he's a friend, and he's someone that inspires me with the things that he does, both as a prosecutor and also as a youth mentor. Providing some serious and important community service from that realm, and what we've been talking about, over the past several months is the importance of reaching and touching our children at a very young age, and the importance of actually mentorship. And earlier I'd explained my background as growing up in a single parent household, and the impact of individuals who came into my life and kind of gave me some sort of guidance was really, really important. And I think that's really important to any young man, and oftentimes kind of the issues that I believe that we're seeing as far as how younger men who are maybe coming from disadvantaged communities are given an opportunity to have other people who care about them to get involved in their lives. So I believe that that's really, really, really important. And I wanted to have you here today because, first of all, I just wanted to give an opportunity to thank you for the work that you do, number one. And number two, to kind of like discuss the importance of mentorship, because I know that you see it from both angles. You see it by having an opportunity to have an impact on some of the younger people's lives prior to possibly getting into the system, but also the impact that it has, not only the prevention and intervention, but it's also important as far as corrections is concerned. So first I want to ask you a little bit about the program
Sure.
that you have as far as the mentorship.
Yeah, no problem. And you know what, Zulu, first off, thanks for having me on. I always like talking to you, so it's all good. Whether we were on radio or not, we keep talking.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so, as you were talking there, I thought about what you said about valuing the people that came into your life. And coming from a single-parent household, I was lucky enough to have both my parents around. And I think that when we look back at the people who affected our lives positively, it's always easy to look towards your parents and remember what they did. But then you have a more expansive view and think back to all the people along the way who had small effects on any given day, whether it's over the course of months or weeks, or maybe it was just one interaction with someone that changed the course of your life and your way of thinking. And so there were a lot of people like that for me. And where it came down to, or where I think I had my interest in really attempting to try to do something like that, was I had two older sisters, and I always bugged my parents because I wanted a little brother, And so my next door neighbors, they were grandparents to a couple of boys who also didn't have their dad around. And so, I taught them to play baseball, play football, all kinds of things. And it's always something that I'm proud of, that both of them treating me like an older brother. They both wound up in college on scholarships, both of them. One with a track scholarship and the other with an academic scholarship.
Right.
And, and me, I'm mixed race, but I was from a sort of a lower economic neighborhood. And the two kids that were next door to me who were treated like little brothers, they were both African-American men or boys. And for them to grow up and go to college, get scholarships, that was something that I'm always proud of that I felt like I had a little bit to do with that. Not everything, but something.
Yeah.
And to have someone, a few years older than you to show you the way and how to get there, we shouldn't discount the value of that.
Right.
And so now that, you and I are both a little bit older and maybe our children are growing up, my daughter's still young, but you think about what you could do for other people. And for the program that I started with a teacher out in Harupa Valley, she was one of the people, I'd mentioned before, who was the victim of a crime and that her husband had actually been killed. And so when I handled the case against the person who had killed him, formed a friendship with her, and she asked me if I could start coming by her school, and of course I was willing to. So I came by the school, and I started off by just having career days and talking to the sixth graders and talking to large classrooms of kids. But, you get any range of kids in every classroom. You have some who already know where they're going in life, who already have good role models, and you have other ones who see an attorney talking to them, and they don't even know what an attorney is or how you would ever get there, how you would ever wind up there.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked, myself and the teacher, about whether or not we could actually talk to those kids one-on-one, and if maybe I could start rounding up some other attorneys to do it. And I'm sure you have in the show, just trying to get one person sometimes to show up is difficult. You imagine trying to get 20 attorneys to show up in one place with their trial schedules and everything. Every month it's a real pain, but it's worth it. Every time everyone gets down there, they form a one-on-one bond with specifically chosen kids, male and female, anyone who the principal or the teachers think could use a role model, someone who could open their eyes to other things that they're not familiar with in their family, such as college or even a higher education than that, or how you get these jobs that seem unreachable for them. Because for me, I'm the first generation in my family to ever go to college. My dad, he didn't graduate from high school, and my mom, she was an immigrant.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had people in my life who opened my eyes to these sort of things. And so we try to provide that to these kids, show them, here's what you can do. We're all from a similar background, and here's how you can get there.
Right. Yeah, that's really important. I mean, we spend a lot of time, and for me, I remember I was telling a story about how I was in juvenile court, and this lady had a son that unfortunately had taken the wrong route, and she was very, very upset, obviously, with the fact that he had some really serious charges and looking to obviously at some point in time be charged. They charged him as an adult because of the crimes, and I mean she was really upset, and she was talking about the lack of a father figure and a role model, and it really hit home, and it made me think. I was born and raised in Tennessee, and although that my father wasn't around, I lived on this street, and there was probably about 12 families on the street, and it was an African American community. However, in every household there was a man, raising his family, and that had a significant impact on me. And obviously, the fact that I had so many individuals that were there who might not necessarily took an active role as far as trying to be, a role model, so to speak. But the fact that they were there, and it's amazing who you can touch just by doing the things that you're supposed to do, like taking care of your family and doing things the right way.
Exactly.
And you just
the
never,
little things.
Yeah, and you just never really know who you can touch. And I remember when I was about 6 years old, my grandfather, he was a janitor, and at night he cleaned law offices. And he took me into the library of a law office he was cleaning, and the name of the attorney was Tyrus Cobb. And he took me in. He says, I want you to introduce you. This is my grandson. He's going to be the next Avon Williams. And Avon Williams is this, really well-known civil rights attorney, especially in the South. And then the gentleman started telling me all these things about, Tyrus Cobb and all these other great attorneys who changed the world. And at that time, I thought, this is what I want to do. And probably 20 years later, I was in probate court, and he was actually the presiding judge.
Oh, wow.
And when
Cool.
he called the case, he told in front of everybody, he says, everyone, I want you to meet the next Avon Williams. And, began to tell me about how great of a man my grandfather was, who had actually passed away when I was in the Marine Corps. And I left there that day and enrolled at Tennessee State University and embarked on this, journey to become an attorney. So I understand firsthand how important it is to have individuals who can, reach other people. I always say it takes a village to raise a child. And although if you look and you think about how many individuals, especially in the work that we do in the criminal justice field, how many of those young men had the right person to just touch them and show some sort of interest in them, then how much their lives could actually have changed. So I'm always
and that's a really good story. You telling that, because it doesn't involve just having a person who was there every day trying to come down on you. It's just one interaction and someone taking the time to give you a kind word and a kind amount of encouragement goes a long way.
Right. Yeah.
And it doesn't always have to be a stern father or some other form of discipline. It could be just a person who gives you the right encouragement and believes in you and says they believe in you, like your story, that can help you get there.
Right. Yeah, young men, I mean, that's kind of some of the thing. I mean, some of these young men, they don't think that they have have what it takes. And I always try to encourage, people who, we hear a lot of rhetoric about the issues, regarding our justice system and issues regarding, the problems that we're having in our communities. But I'm a solutions-based type of individual, and here that's kind of what we like to do. Is we like to not, have a show where we spend the entire time criticizing, but we like to really give people solutions to how they can really make a difference. And one of the things that I always, encourage people to do is, try to figure out ways in which to go out and have an impact on some of these young men and try to touch them. And we have this organizations, and I hope that hopefully you'll be able to come one day and speak. It's called Stop and Frisk Academy, where we talk to these at-risk young men every month and try to, we not only tell them what to do when they have, issues as far as when they have interactions with police, but we try to motivate them as well. And I think that, that's really huge in my opinion, and that's what we've been trying to do over the last, at least every other week we have some sort of conversation about how to have an impact on young people. And I think mentorship is a way that I believe that we all should take some of our time to try to figure out ways to touch other people, and especially our young people.
And that's a great program that you do there, and of course I'd like to participate. And part of the reason why is because in the courtroom, and really in the courtroom only, we're adversaries. Mm-hmm. Outside of it, I don't see any reason to continue that. We can work together on these sorts of issues. There's no reason why, just because we stand on opposite sides of a case when we're in court. As soon as we leave, there's no reason for us to continue that. We can work together on these sort of things.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it's all the same. I mean, I remember the biggest question that I get as a criminal defense attorney is, as you know, I mean, I worked in law enforcement for about 14 years. Mm-hmm. And someone would always ask me, says, what made you go to the other side of the fence? And I don't see it that way. I mean, I think that ultimately it's the same goal, in my opinion. I don't see, it being any different. I think that we're all working for us to have a better society, and protecting our community. And protecting our community both involves, having an impact on those who may find themselves accused as well as the victims, as you said. And I remember when you were received the award at the banquet at the RT Fields for community service, where you're talking about how, you know, there's victims on both sides. I mean, you have the family of the individual who, unfortunately, you know, whether he did it or not, somehow he's found his way in the criminal justice system, as well as an individual who's become a victim. I mean, it's all, it's bad on both sides of the fence when you're going through that process.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's another part that led me into outside of work, building off of what you mentioned about being solution-based, is that no matter what happens in our cases, you know, the end outcome, the fact is that whatever happened to bring us all there has already happened.
Right.
And the people on each side who have been victimized have already been victimized.
Right.
So that's our job, to triage that damage on each side. But once we're done for the day, or when we're on our lunch breaks, or whatever else, or on weekends, what can you do to be solution-based? Because a lot of times the problem's already happened, and the solution is more about just mitigating damage in our job. But your effect on the world, what can you do to affect a solution?
Right.
And we can talk, and I'm sure you talk on your show quite often about issues in the criminal justice system and how you can try to affect those. However, how about the root of the problem, which is right there, young men, young women in the community who are one bad choice away from winding up, you know, looking at one of us. And how can we prevent that?
Exactly.
Because we don't get a chance to do that a lot in our job.
Right.
So it's outside of our job where we have to try to make that effect.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's really important, and that's what it's all about, is touching people, and trying to make that difference, and that's part of the reason, I guess, that, you know, everybody wants to make that difference, and that's how we have to do it, instead of, again, like I said, I mean, just barking about the issues with the system, is it can only get you so far. It's when you start figuring out ways that you can really go in and help people and mentor them. And it's amazing. I mean, I wish there was a more solid statistic as to how it, you know, the mentorship helps prevent individuals from getting into the criminal justice system. And obviously there's no real way of knowing, but I believe that it's the most effective way of helping individuals stay out of the criminal justice system, is just being supportive and finding a way that you can make a difference, just like the organization that you have, going into the schools and giving, you know, these individuals that don't even think these things are possible. They don't think that people who look like, you know, like me, you know, or many of us who come from, you know, minority communities, they don't know that you can become a lawyer. They don't know that you can become a doctor. And I mean, it's, you know, and you're giving them an opportunity to show them that, hey, man, you know, this is, you know, what you can do, and you're not limited. And oftentimes that's why people find themselves in situations, because they don't think there's really any other way, and everybody around them is doing the wrong thing. But just that whole, just an opportunity for someone to just take an interest in you, it means so much to a young, impressionable mind, you know?
Well, for those actual kids, 5th and 6th graders that we go out and we talk to and we form one-on-one relationships with as mentors and mentees, the teachers tell us all the time that from their background and their houses, they have never seen someone wearing a suit and tie. You know, show up with a job and then tell them, I'm not, you know, some guy from a rich neighborhood. I'm just like you. I came from a neighborhood just like this one, and here's how I got there. So sitting right where you are right now, I was in the same exact place. Mom who had English as her second language, and a dad who very early on could no longer, you know, reasonably assist with my homework. How did I wind up where I'm at, and how can you do the same thing? And it just opens up that door to them, that window. And the same thing happened for me, because when I was in 4th grade, a TA in one of my classes, she took a handful of students from every class who obviously the school knew were of the background to where they could benefit from the experience. She took us on a field trip to a college, walked us around her campus, showed us everything, and it was brand new to all of us. And that sort of memory stuck with me, just like the memory you had. And that was something that from that day forward I thought I wanted to get to. And so it had an effect. we're just trying to do the same thing.
Exactly. Exactly. Most definitely.
Hey, how you doing, Mr. Carney? I'm Bilal.
Hey. How you doing, sir?
Yeah, I run a nonprofit organization for at-risk youth as well. And, I mean, I understand, from certain perspective in terms of what I see as a problem with our youth. But what do you see in terms of, like, do you think it's like a social economic thing that allows them to not be able to vision themselves in the future? And as far as, do you also see the absence of fatherhood as being an issue as well?
Those are both definitely factors, and I believe they're both heavy factors on what can lead a person to go down, you choose it, whatever the wrong path is, whether it be hard drugs or crime or whatever else, or really just being lackadaisical towards life and not achieving something higher. Those two factors, I do believe, go a long way. There was a time recently, a few years ago, that I went and spoke at a couple of continuation schools that were actually out in the Newport Beach and Costa Mesa area. So at those schools, some of the students in those classes actually were from households where they had a father figure and a mother figure, or some of those students in there were from households where they had all of the socioeconomic advantages. So that's not everything. Sometimes it's less about having people in your life and more about having the right people who actually care, because the person who helps you out doesn't necessarily have to be a person in a suit. The person who believes in you could be someone like your hardworking father who's a janitor, like Mr. Ali, and or his grandfather, excuse me. And so while those two factors, they factor in heavily into who we choose to participate in our mentorship program, we also realize that, at risk isn't limited to just people, who have those factors that play in their lives.
And I think that's one of the things that I've always say. At risk don't mean that you're involved in any type of criminal activity. It's just basically an environment in which you grew up where you constantly seeing those types of things that can actually guide you down that negative path. And also, one of the things that I do in my program is I find it easy to take them outside the confines of their community, to allow them to be able to see something totally different than what they typically see every single day. And I think that's what allows them to dream, to see something beyond their community and say, hey, I can achieve this. Oh, this exists. Because a lot of the kids that, grew up in inner city, the only thing that they, can really see, the furthest they can see is what they see on a TV screen. They can see people going fishing, or they can see people going hiking. And I find it very easy to kind of take them outside the confines of their community. And that allows them to dream, and that allows them to think that they can go somewhere other than where they're at.
I'm smiling to hear you say that, because to me, I see it the same exact way. I thought of it the same way. Just to build off of that and give you an example, when I was going to those couple of continuation schools, that was one of the topics that I brought up with them, was telling them that it's a big world. It's a really big world, and worrying too much about what the tough guy across the street thinks of you, or what the girl down at the end of the block, if she thinks you're cool. A lot of these kids in these neighborhoods, they get stuck in a very small mindset to where everything that's just right there on their block is the only thing that's important to them. And so I try to tell them about growing up on a similar block, but look at me now and look at the places that I've been. And I don't say it to them to shove it in their faces. I tell them because I want them to dream bigger than just, being important on this small street where the people who are looking up to you maybe aren't going anywhere either, at that point. I see it the same way.
And Rosa here. I don't have a nonprofit, but I think it's important that we're talking about mentorship, because according actually to the National Education Association, there was a study done on TRIO programs. TRIO programs focus on mentoring youth and really helping them kind of come out of this poverty cycle that they're in through enabling them to achieve higher education. And it estimated that about 80% of the students that go into these programs end up graduating from a second higher education place, which means that, yeah, mentoring does work indeed. And I think it's important that we're addressing the fact that, that there needs to be more mentorship, because we are addressing a bigger issue with deals with this this whole concept called the opportunity gap, where children from low-income areas do not have the opportunities to experience enrichments in the arts, physical activities, mentoring and academic enrichments that support their learning, much like those children in higher income homes. And children do need to be exposed to these types of mentorship programs and these types of activities that kind of allow them to experience self-confidence, and that also kind of allow them to target their academic needs, because it's very different when a child is born into poverty. Actually, there is a study that says that they experience 6,000 fewer hours of learning than their peers in solidly middle class and upper income homes. So that in itself already places them at a disadvantage, and it kind of has to do with the fact that it's like if you have a father, if you're born into a home where both parents work multiple jobs, and they don't know where their next meal is coming from, they really don't have the time to focus on finding extra help when it comes to school, when it comes to things that matter in that aspect. And I think it's really important that we're actually addressing mentorship, because I myself, I haven't made it yet, but I'm the first one in my family to graduate from college. My mom doesn't speak English. My dad works, 24/7, and I can truly attest to the fact that TRIO works, that mentorship works, because there was people in my life, and there has always been people in my life that have enabled me to get out of that cycle of like, hey, it's not okay to be pregnant. It's not okay to be like the person that's next door. It's better for you to dream. And I think it's important that we are addressing this, because it really does work.
Right.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
And I think that sometimes what happens is that the reason why mentorship is really important is sometimes it's, the focus of sometimes our younger people, because I think that that's why, when you have individuals, I mean, I'm a huge sports fan, and I love music, but I also like to focus on the fact that we need to promote more inside of certain communities that sports and music is not always the way out.
Yeah.
And that's why, people who are involved in different academic endeavors, whether it's law, medicine, or whatever it is, whether it's law enforcement, it could be whatever it is, I think it's great. It's good for those individuals to come back into the communities and, talk to younger people and let them know that they can do whatever they really want to do.
Yeah.
And that's hugely important. And sometimes actually I've seen situations where parents have actually been involved in trying to convince their children that they're that there's ways out, but they even co-sign the whole idea that they're limited in their abilities to get out of certain neighborhoods just based upon sports or something like that. So, it's good for us to go back.
Yeah.
So, and I know that you said that you're from San Diego originally?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. And I know that, thinking about the areas in which we come from, especially those of us who come from, minority communities, going back to those neighborhoods and kind of giving them some sort of guidance is really, really, really important. And I guess the question, one of the questions that I want to ask you is that I know that you've actually, been going into the schools, and I know that you're not, quite as old as I am. But do you believe that, how do you feel that the generations, what do you think there's an impact on the generational gap? Do you see that it's more difficult touching children or young people today than it would have been, maybe, 10, 15, 20 years ago?
Yeah, and when you ask a question like that, and I think about the answer, it's really hard to answer that question without sounding like an old guy or sounding like, my dad talking about me and my generation, But one of the big difficulties is actually something very tangible that you can say right off the bat. And what sometimes concerns me when we talk to these kids is that the only thing they want to talk about is video games.
Right.
And, you know, it's so pervasive. And, you know, there are some people out there who go on and actually it's an actual athletic event, I guess it's considered now. It's on ESPN playing video games. But just like any other sport, thinking that that's going to be your way out is, you know, a very small way of thinking. You have to think about the bigger picture.
Right.
And what concerns me is at times the amount of hours that I do say are wasted in every day with these kids playing video games when other kids who are at private schools or in better neighborhoods are spending their afternoon studying and increasing that gap that one day they're going to have to face when they're trying to get into college or trying to get a job. And that would be a huge tangible hurdle that we have to talk to these kids about often, is that, you know, it's fine to have recreational activities and it's fine to be, you know, multi-layered and have other things in your life, but the world's conspiring against you, and it's not giving you a lot of advantages. And one of the few advantages that you have is that you have obstacles in front of you that if you overcome them, you are of stronger character than the kids who didn't have to face those same obstacles. And if they're sitting around on the couch playing a video game, they're not doing that. And we try our best to get through to them, but that's actually a point of emphasis, you know, for me.
You know, one of the things about it is you hit home when you said about them video games, because I know my son, he gets so caught up with the video game, just like every conversation he want to have is about a video game. But, you know, I find it, I find that I tried to sit back and I tried to encourage him, okay, instead of being in front of the video game, get behind the video games and learn more about programming computers and stuff like that to actually manufacture the video games, you know, and make money like that, you know, on an entrepreneur, you know, side of it. And, you know, one of the things, you know, you say you work at a school, I mean, you do your mentorship at a school. And do you find that, you know, when you look at school nowadays, you know, a lot of the after-school programs have been cut, a lot of the arts in the school have been cut. How are you know, we talked about it last week. I can remember when I came in, we had a wood class, you know, where we went in and we learned about woodwork and how to manufacture things and use our hands and have a skill. A lot of that has been taken away from the school system. And I think that, you know, had we had those type of programs still in place, then that would kind of take the attention away some, you know, I mean, from the video games and stuff. Do you find that, you know, that this was, you know, one of those things that we can still use now in our school system, that we can encourage to bring those types of programs back to our school system?
Yeah, I would hope so, because I agree with you completely on that. The view of what school is now has been narrowed down because of the budget to be such a myopic sort of funnel of it's either academics or sports, and everything else is filtered away. And the problem with that is that even though when we collectively have our programs, a huge point of emphasis is always to talk about college, we all know that college isn't right for all of them. And in the end, certain students, maybe the best path for them is to go to some sort of trade school or pursue any other type of employment. And as you mentioned there with telling your son about coding or computers, sometimes if you're really, really adept at computers, all you need is an associate's degree, and someone out there will be clamoring to get you as an IT, you know, someone to work in their IT department. So college is the goal, the end goal, for most students, for most of them. But for many other ones, it's not necessarily exactly the best path for them to achieve some sort of success. And so when you have a certain person who, say, would be best suited to be an electrician of some sort, go to a trade school, but all they do is go to class and do average there. They're also average in sports, and they don't get exposed to those other sorts of working with their hands or thinking outside the box and trying out other things. And how are they ever going to wind up there? You know, so we're missing certain students who don't fit the traditional box for school or mentoring when we don't have these other eye-opening or mind-opening pursuits. So yeah, it's unfortunate. I think that they could benefit from from any sort of other trade being exposed to them at an earlier age.
And I know a lot of it is that we don't seem to be like open to, as adults, when we're talking to children, especially, parents in my generation and even parents before me, they really don't. They just assume that if an individual ends up going to college, that basically is going to open up doors for them and put them in a position where they're going to have all these opportunities. And what happens is that you have a lot of students who end up going to college and not really knowing what they really want to do, and pursuing majors that may or may not necessarily benefit them as far as professionally is concerned. And you see a lot of that, and that's where when I was in school, just like Bilal was saying, I mean, we did have trade shops. We had auto mechanics. We had things such as welding. We had all kinds of different types of skills that are very important skills that people can learn. And people would get out of school and immediately begin to start involving themselves. Even sometimes, even before they get out of school, they can engage in work that would produce a nice income. And nowadays, I mean, I don't even know if they have any of that stuff anymore as far as school is concerned.
Yeah.
No.
Well, they certainly don't have welding, I'm sure, but I mean, that'd be a great example. There might be some student out there right now whose path should have been to be a master welder, but doesn't even know it exists, and has one person saying go to college where they can actually rack up a lot of debt that they didn't have to. So when we talk about mentoring students, each individual is an individual, and you have to really tailor your advice to them and what's best for them. And I don't really know the answer. It is sad that a lot of those trade programs have been taken away.
Right. And I'm assuming is that money? Is that how they? Is it budget or? Is it?
Actually, in 2017, under the Trump administration, for the fiscal year 2018 budget proposal, they called for a 10% cut in funding for two-year programs and after-school programs, and then that means that the average amount of funding, according to a study, decreased from $282,000 to $260,000. Right. So it's quite a lot of money.
Right.
And when you think about our discretionary spending, we spend only 5% of that budget in education, whereas 55% of it goes to military.
Right.
Yeah.
But the thing about it is that that what he cut, that 10% that he cut, it's a continuing pattern that they continue to take. I mean, some of the music programs is leaving out of the schools now. You don't see the bands like you used to see the bands no more because there's no music program. They're taking away these viable things that these children need.
Yeah.
Of course they need the education aspect of it, but they need something else.
Yeah.
And like you say, these video games, man, between the rap, the video games, and the sports, man, it's like our children is going, further and further away. And Mr. Carney, I salute you with the program, because it's very rare that you find individuals that's actually even doing mentoring programs. Some people, they say they do mentoring programs, but they don't really do it. You don't see the work. You see them getting the grants and everything else, but you don't see them on the ground level. You don't see the work being done. Yeah. Somebody raised a question to me at one point in time. In my program, when we do community service, they say, well, what do you do for community service? The kid, they come to you, it's just 6 months probation. What do you do? And I said, well, I don't paint the walls. They want you to paint the walls, and they want you to pick up trash and stuff like that, and they want you to make them work like that to do the community service. I'm saying, no. If this kid then came to me and he just stole something out of Target, if this kid then came to me because he just stole a cell phone or beat up on somebody, let's deal with the problem that got him there in the first place. So my community service comes from, let's sit down and let's discuss this issue in a group setting, in a workshop setting. So you won't go back and repeat this history over again and wind up in the same position again. What is picking up trash going to do? What is painting walls going to do? And I think that's how we have to deal with our children. We don't listen to them. And that's the biggest problem right now. We work, as parents, we work, we grind, we work, And we don't sit down at the dinner table and talk about the problem. So they're left to try to figure it out for themselves. And a lot of times it's not the right way that they figure it out.
Yeah, that's true. I know that, I mean, as far as the juvenile justice system and once an individual actually, I know that they have probation officers, and to be quite honest with you, I'm not quite sure how that probation actually works, and if it's more of a traditional type of probation type of format when someone is you know, in the program. But I mean, it would be nice if they're, I mean, not only from a preventative measure, but to prevent recidivism, if there's a way to you know, get the type of help that an individual child or an individual juvenile would need in order to connect with that individual to help make sure that that individual is on the right path, or he can connect with an individual who can connect with him and his needs, so that that individual could, you know, prevent him from following the path, obviously, that he's already been on.
Yeah.
You know?
But it's rare, you know, even with the juvenile, because I deal with a couple of juvenile justice departments, and the thing about it is, when they give them 6 months probation, it's 6 months probation. Okay, you come in, it's a curfew, and that's it. You come in from school, you don't go back outside the house. Don't commit no crimes. Make sure you keep your grades to this level, so forth and so on. It is nothing where they send them to a mentoring program or something like that. Now, there is one program that is ran by the judge by the name of David Wesley, who came up with the what they call the teen court. And the teen court is actually spread throughout a lot of high schools and junior high schools. I think it's junior high schools. And what they do, no, Dorsey high schools. And what they do is, if the child commits a crime and it's his first offense, they go through what they call a court setting amongst the students. So the students act as the judge and the jury. So they find whether or not, you know, innocence or guilt. And at that program, they'll give them 6 months probation. And if they complete everything within that 6 months that the judge orders for them to do, then he snatches it off their record, and it's like they never was arrested ever before, which is an excellent program, and which is some of the youth that I deal with now.
Right. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, as far as the mentorship, I wonder if there is a way, do you know, Mike, if there's something like that as far as like a nationwide or a countywide or a statewide program of mentorship for juveniles, or is pretty much generally more of a volunteer type of situation?
Yeah, my experience from having cases that originated in juvenile court and then were eventually resolved in some way, shape, or form for DJJ or a probation of some sort is that, you know, they complete their program. You hope for the best. There are programs within the program that are available to them that they can avail themselves of, anger management, you name it. However, if you're talking about a person taking on the individual child and taking an interest in them and trying to also make sure that they are not just handling that portion of the rehabilitation, say, whether it's mental side, anger side, grade side, and possibly even checking in on them later. I got to be honest, I don't think that exists in the strict mentor form. You know, a person who's strictly there to be a friend and a guide to the child. You do have probation officers who do a good job and try their best, but you definitely can't expect a probation officer to provide that level of close care when they have so many cases.
Exactly.
So an actual mentor, no, unfortunately, I don't think so.
Yeah, and it seems like there's not really many nonprofit organizations as well.
Exactly.
You know, I don't see very many of them. You know, as far as you know, I know that, you know, there's mentor programs, obviously, such as the Big Brothers and Big Sisters, but you don't hear about that very often anymore.
Yeah. Well, there.
And you know, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go. Oh, well, there is certainly programs. Well, there's the Big Brothers. There's Upward Bounds all over the counties that actually help individual young students. And then there's programs like Bright Prospect, ETS, that help students with not getting them out of the streets. And there is also nonprofit organizations. There's a lot of golfers actually that have nonprofit organizations that help students bridge that gap between, the poverty gap and getting them to educate themselves. So there is certainly a lot of help out there. And a lot of the times the district and the school themselves do have access and do have communication with these programs that come into the schools and speak with the students. So there are certainly programs that help students out there to keep them out of the streets.
Yeah, and what I wanted to mention there, even though it wasn't 100% on topic, was that there's a program out in the Inland Empire called the Inspire program, and what they do is they focus. Their focus is on aged-out foster kids. Once those kids turn 18 and they're no longer provided the housing straight from their foster parents, they're given a monthly stipend that is enough to keep them on their feet, but doesn't actually provide them any sort of direction and any sort of way to sustain themselves once they're aged out of that part of the program too. So this program actually helps to put them in a house, and a big part of what they do is they assign every child who comes to them a one-on-one mentor.
Wow.
To try to teach them life skills, because once they turn 18 and they're out, they're out.
Right.
And they no longer have a person who watches over them.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of the nonprofits that I've encountered over the course of the years, I don't know. It's just a lot of them. I find that it's some of them be one, and this is just from my personal experience with a lot of the nonprofit groups that I've dealt with. It's more or less along the lines. They gangbang with it. It's a money thing, and that's just being perfectly honest with you, because I dealt with a lot of individuals that's in the inner city youth, that deals with the inner city at-risk youth, and I don't see the work. And that's just being perfectly honest with you. One of the things that I found it necessary to do is, like, if you go to my Facebook page, I constantly post as many pictures as I can, interacting with the youth, showing exactly the activities that we do. And it's sad to see that there's a lot of people that have the title on them, but they're not putting the work in. We're not seeing the difference. And it's not coming from a hater perspective or whatever that, but this is just coming from my personal experience of dealing with a lot of different nonprofit organizations that's out there that claim to be doing something for the youth.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I think that, that is true. Unfortunately, you do probably have a lot of nonprofits that aren't, that's not focusing, whether it's because of budget issues or whether it's because getting individuals to participate. There's a lot of things behind the scenes sometimes when you have nonprofit and organizations that are trying to just simply exist. And when you're just trying to simply exist, it's like what often happens sometimes when you have organizations that are not self-funded. Then sometimes you find yourself kind of more focused on just existing as opposed of the operations of what's going on. So, those things are really, really important. But to me, I think that when it comes to trying to keep young people out of trouble and keeping young people into falling, navigating what I call what a really mentor of mine used to call the ghetto maze, Dr. Abdul Mumin, is to have somebody out there trying to assist them and trying to, go through that process, and the right people that are able to go back into the communities to help them do that. We see, like right now, when you have the inner city and you have a young man going through that process, they're going to gravitate towards any man that's going to help them, to teach them how to be a man. That's just the way it is. The one thing about a young man or even a young woman is that they need their father. You know what I mean? And somebody to fill that void. And if the wrong person is there to fill that void, that's who they're going to go along with. And actually, this has been a never-ending cycle when it comes to finding young men who find themselves into the wrong trap, and then the fathers, their father went the wrong way. Then you know what I mean. It's just like a cycle. And what I want to do is encourage people as much as I can possible. going back to the communities and finding a way to touch these young men, going to these schools to touch these young men, doing the things that we're doing, and the things that that Mike's doing in these schools. I mean, it's so important. And unless we begin to start doing these things, we're continually losing our young men because they don't have the right direction. That's really what it boils down to. Even before it gets to the whole other issues that we're talking about, the justice system.
Yeah.
We have to figure out ways that we can personally, touch people, and that's important.
Yeah, and I will say, just going back to what you said, I will say that a lot of it has to do with a lot of nonprofits just trying to exist, because there's not a lot of funding to go towards nonprofits to help at-risk youth. It's just not.
Yeah.
It goes along the same line for veterans. When you try to look for money for veterans, it's very hard to find it, and it's a sad reality, but it is reality. And kind of piggyback off of something you said. I don't know what made me what triggered it, but I can remember a time going to I pick up my kids almost every day from school, and one of the things that when I pick them up, I've always had these little young men there say, hey, BJ, there go your dad, hey, BJ, or it's a kid that see him for the first time. And just to see them jump up and say, hey, that's your dad, but I don't see a lot of their fathers, so I start talking to my son about it. And believe me, a lot of kids grow up without these fathers, man. It leaves this impression on him, man. It's a sad reality, man, just looking at how many fathers that is not in the household. And what I took that as, when I see all these kids jump up and say this, and it's multiple kids, it's not just one. I look at it as though that they seeing that fatherhood in me that they don't have.
Yeah. One of my best friends, who was still one of my best friends from high school, he had that same issue, and he actually had a lot of anger that got him in trouble. And that anger was all due to his dad bailing on him. And so my dad started treating him in the same way like you mentioned there, as a father figure and a son. And what we find when we do mentorship programs is that a lot of these kids who don't have their dads around, they crave that discipline. They crave someone to actually tell them what's right and wrong and actually come down on them every once in a while. And a buddy of mine found that with my dad, and if we can do that also for these kids, they want to be told what the right thing to do is. As a mentor, your job is not to just go in there and be their friend and reinforce everything they say. You got to go in there and tell them what they should be doing, and every once in a while that does involve having a few stern words with them. And believe it or not, they want that.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's important. I mean, I felt that way. I mean, I think that by having, especially my grandfather, to look up to as a that was really important. I mean, I just can't emphasize how important just having him around and having other men around that just like I said, that do the right things. And I mean, it's so critical. And I think that and I always like to promote that within our communities. About not just talking about it, but actually going out and trying to touch them, instead of criticizing about our generation. You know what I mean? I mean, we do have problems, obviously, like we talked about earlier, the me generation. But at the same time, I just think that it's really important, that we do that. But man, I really appreciate speaking with you today, man. I appreciate you chiming in with us and being a guest on the show, and I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the work that you do both in the courtroom and outside the courtroom, because I think it's really important that people understand that there are people that are working on both sides of the fence that do have an interest in people and doing the right thing, and we need the dialogue, because I just don't believe, that, we're both trying to achieve the same thing, and it's good for people to understand that, man. And I applaud the work that you do, reaching out to people and doing the mentor program. I mean, I think that's great, and I'd love, man, for you to come in and talk to our kids too.
Of course,
we do that and reach out to you, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and to all three of you, keep doing what you're doing. Keep up the good work.
Okay, man. Thanks a lot, man.
All right. Take care.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Well, again, thank you guys for joining in for us for this this edition of Justice Watch with Attorney Zulu Ali, and appreciate you guys chiming in with us. And we'll be back next week. Yeah.
And don't forget to log on to our Facebook page or justicewatchradio.com for more information and previous episodes.
Okay. So, on behalf of the Justice Watch crew, Rosa Nunez, Michael Bilal Clark, and Dr. Akil Bashir, thank you for joining in, and we'll see you next week, same time, same place, same channel. Until next week, stay blessed.
Got to get back. I need some get back. Pay back.
KCAA Loma Linda, 1050 AM, 106.5 FM, and now 106.